We remember pirates as romantic rebels of the sea, black sails, moonlight, a captain with a cutlass, a chest of coins beyond the reef. The image cracks in the court record. There, cruelty is not decoration, it is testimony. Behind the silhouette are trial records, legal testimony, and early printed accounts from a time when Caribbean piracy was not folklore, but a threat moving through real shipping lanes. The pages do not give us a clean legend. They give us frightened sailors, captured vessels, disputed memories, and officials turning violence at sea into evidence on paper. That is the danger of the pirate myth. Later fiction can soften the violence until the victims almost disappear. Sensational retellings can turn every dark anecdote into proof, whether or not the source can bear the weight. The evidence has to be read between those traps. Court testimony can bring us close to what survivors said happened aboard captured ships, but it still needs context. Early pirate literature preserves details that shaped the public image of piracy, but printed drama is not the same thing as a sworn deposition. The question is why violence kept appearing inside the world of piracy. The inherited image gives way to parchment. The tavern poster fades. The cheerful rebel becomes a shadow beside a court record. As the Caribbean map opens, the mystery sharpens. If the brutality was real, was it chaos at sea, or did fear serve a purpose? Across the Caribbean, the stakes were written into the shipping lanes. Merchant ships moved between islands and Atlantic ports, carrying sugar, tobacco, coin, cloth, weapons, medicine, food, and the supplies that kept wooden worlds alive. To a pirate crew, the prize was not only treasure in a chest, it was the hull, the rigging, the sails, the cargo, the rope, the guns, the water, and sometimes the ship itself. A broadside could destroy that value in minutes. A cannonade could tear open the vessel the pirates hoped to sell, strip, or sail away. Musket fire could kill experienced hands. A fire on deck could turn cargo into smoke. Even victory could leave the winners with a leaking prize, wounded men, and less profit than the risk had promised. The cleanest victory often happened before full violence began. A pirate ship on the horizon carried more than guns. It carried rumors from other captures, warnings passed between sailors, and the memory of what had happened to crews who resisted. Reputation could arrive before the boarding party. Pirate theatre made that reputation practical. Edward Teach, remembered as Blackbeard, is the clearest example. Accounts describe a man who cultivated terror as public image. A huge dark beard, weapons displayed across his body, smoke, or slow-burning matches, used to make him seem almost infernal to frightened witnesses. The point is not that he was a demon, or that every dramatic detail should be treated as courtroom fact. The image worked because it was meant to be seen. From a merchant deck, that performance changed the calculation. Surrender might preserve lives. Resistance might invite close combat, damaged rigging, cannon fire, and punishment after capture. A captain did not need to believe every rumor to understand the danger of testing it. For pirates, fear could win what force might ruin. A surrendered prize stayed intact. Cargo remained usable. The pirate crew avoided losses. The target crew, surrounded by reputation, could be pushed into choosing survival before the first broadside settled the matter. The cruelty was not softened by its usefulness. Terror became a business weapon, turning the imagination of victims into part of the attack. Surrender did not always end the pressure. Once the deck was taken and the obvious goods were seized, another question waited below. What had the captives hidden? And what would pirates do when fear alone no longer produced an answer? After the prize was taken, the fear did not end. It moved below deck. The first search was physical. Sea chests opened. Cargo lists were examined. Pockets emptied. Keys demanded. On a merchant ship, though, the most valuable things were not always in plain view. Coin could be hidden. Jewelry could be passed from hand to hand. Small valuables could disappear into bedding, barrels, false compartments, or the memory of the sailor who knew where they had been placed. A surrendered crew still possessed one thing: information. They had lost the ship, but they might know where value was hidden. Some historical accounts describe pirates answering that problem with torture, meant to force disclosure. One reported practice was known as sweating. It needs careful handling, because not every dramatic pirate story survives with the same weight of evidence. The method appears in early accounts as a coercive ordeal, and its logic is grimly clear. Picture the mast not as romance, but as the center of a controlled space. A captive is forced to move around it, again and again, while armed men stand close enough to keep him moving and afraid. This is not a duel, it is pressure applied over time, in front of people who may know where the hidden money is. In that setting, pain and exhaustion enforced the questions. Where is the coin? Who has the silver? Which chest has the false bottom? What did the captain hide before the pirates came aboard? The ledgers and testimony make the cruelty colder, not smaller. The violence was not always punishment for resistance or anger after capture. In some cases, it had a specific target: knowledge. The pirates did not need every captive to break. They needed enough fear in the room for one person to speak, or enough uncertainty for the next victim to decide silence was no longer worth the cost. One sailor's body became a warning, addressed to the rest of the crew. The accounts are not simple or universal. We should not imagine the same method on every captured vessel, or treat every printed detail as a sworn deposition. The recurring pattern still matters. After surrender, pirates could use terror to turn hidden information into recoverable wealth. On the open sea, reputation could win the ship. Below deck, coercion could break the secret. That kind of control aimed at captives raises a harder question aboard the pirate ship itself. A crowded, dangerous workplace, full of armed men, divided shares, jealousy, fear, and rules. If terror helped extract obedience from prisoners, what held the pirate crew together? The pressure turns inward, from the prisoners below deck to the armed men above them. The old image of the pirate crew is built around freedom, sailors escaping naval discipline, choosing their captain, dividing plunder by agreement, and living beyond the reach of kings. There is truth in that image, but only if we do not stop there. On some pirate ships, freedom was written down as obligation. The so-called pirate articles were not a single universal code, but surviving examples and later accounts show the kinds of rules crews could make for themselves. They set out shares of plunder. They named officers and duties. They promised compensation for injury. They restricted gambling, fighting, theft from the common stock, or desertion in battle. These rules mattered because a pirate vessel was a crowded, armed conspiracy. Every voyage depended on trust among men who had already chosen to live outside ordinary law. A hidden coin, a private bargain, a refusal to fight, or a challenge to command could endanger the whole enterprise. The same crew that might vote on a captain also needed a way to punish the man who threatened everyone else's survival. Freedom carried terms. Historical accounts associate pirate discipline with severe punishments, and one of the starkest was marooning. The sentence needed no dungeon and no executioner. A man could be put ashore on a small island or deserted coast with limited supplies, sometimes with a weapon, while the ship that had been his whole world pulled away into the horizon. Marooning made delay part of the punishment. The crew did not have to watch what followed. They only had to leave. We should be careful not to imagine every pirate ship using the same rules, or every punishment unfolding in the same ritualized way. Pirate government varied by crew, captain, voyage, and circumstance. The pattern is important. Participation and coercion were not opposites aboard a pirate ship. They could exist in the same articles, on the same deck, among the same men. Compared with naval service, piracy could offer sailors a share, a voice, and a chance to escape brutal hierarchy. That freedom was conditional, it was protected by rules, and those rules could be enforced with abandonment, violence, and fear. The pirate ship was not a lawless playground, it was a floating bargain, held together by profit, consent, resentment, and punishment. Once the code becomes part of the evidence, another problem comes into focus. Pirate history is full of dramatic stories, printed confessions, trial testimony, and legends repeated until they feel like fact. Before we decide what this dark record proves, we have to ask how much of it can be trusted. Pirate history cannot be read like pirate legend. The most dramatic story is not always the strongest one, and the quietest document is not always the least important. The strongest layer is legal, admiralty proceedings, trial material, depositions, and testimony from people describing piracy in a courtroom, under the pressure of law. These records are not perfect. Witnesses could be frightened, angry, mistaken, or trying to protect themselves, but they are closer to the violence than most later retellings, and they often preserve the names of ships, captains, victims, charges, and punishments with a bureaucratic coldness that folklore does not have. Another layer is one of the most influential pirate books ever printed, A General History of the Pirates, published in 1724 under the name Captain Charles Johnson. Without it, many famous pirate lives would be harder to reconstruct. It helped preserve details about crews, captains, captures, and the political life aboard pirate ships. But it also helped create the pirate image. It was written for readers in a market that rewarded drama, danger, confession, and moral warning. That does not make it useless. It makes it a source to handle with both gratitude and suspicion. Farther from the courtroom are the stories that hardened into folklore, tavern versions, theatrical villains, children's adventure books, and cinema. By then, the pirate had become a costume as much as a historical person. A hook, a flag, a grin, a map, a chest. The suffering that made those symbols frightening was often pushed out of frame. Modern historians help pull the layers apart. Writers such as Marcus Rediker and Colin Woodard do not simply ask whether one shocking anecdote is true. They ask what repeated patterns reveal about labor, violence, empire, trade, and survival at sea. So the responsible answer is not to believe every dark tale or to dismiss them all as propaganda. The safer method is convergence. When court testimony, early accounts, shipboard rules, and later historical interpretation point in the same direction, the pattern deserves weight. When a detail appears only in a sensational chain of retellings, it deserves a question mark. That distinction matters. If we exaggerate the evidence, we turn victims into atmosphere. If we erase the evidence, we turn pirates back into harmless myth. The truth sits in the uncomfortable middle. Imperfect records, repeated behavior, and enough surviving testimony to leave the romance badly damaged. With the weaker certainty stripped away, the strongest pattern remains. What remains is a pattern with three fronts. Before a shot was fired, reputation could do the work of the guns. A black sail, a feared name, a story carried from one harbor to the next could make a merchant crew surrender while the ship, cargo, and pirate crew remained intact. After surrender, fear could move below deck. If valuables were hidden, or if captives were believed to know more than they admitted, violence became a way to force information out of them. Not every reported detail carries the same certainty, and not every captured ship followed the same script. The repeated connection between coercion and concealed wealth is too strong to treat as simple folklore. Inside the pirate ship, the same logic turned inward. Articles could divide shares and promise a rough kind of participation, but they also marked the boundaries of obedience. A crew that rejected naval discipline did not escape discipline altogether. It built its own, and in some cases enforced it with punishments meant to terrify anyone who threatened the fragile order of the voyage. That is the answer the surviving record leaves behind. Caribbean pirate cruelty was not movie wickedness or random rage. It was a maritime terror system, reputation against targets, coercion against captives, discipline against crews, preserved in serious but imperfect evidence. The legend survives because it remembers the costume better than the cost. The hat, the flag, the pistol, the grin, the map with a red line across blue water. It forgets the quieter figures, the merchant sailor watching an unfamiliar sail grow larger on the horizon, the captive pressured for goods he may or may not have hidden, the man left to understand that freedom aboard a pirate vessel ended where the crew's survival began. The pirate myth is selective. It kept the costume and softened the system that made the costume feared. When court records, early accounts, and cautious historians are placed back beneath the legend, the romance does not disappear completely. It becomes smaller, less innocent, easier to see through. On the empty deck that remains, the most important figures are not the pirates we turned into icons, but the victims whose fear helped make those icons powerful. History changes when the people hidden underneath a legend are allowed back into view.